So this is a continuing discussion, heart circle, if you will, about Harry Hay and the book Radically Gay by Will Roscoe. And I've continued on reading it, and I got to the chapter where they're discussing how the Mattachine Society started off as, kind of like AA, but then it transformed into a more radical group where they were actually asserting their role as homosexuals within a communal society, and saying that throughout history we did have a role and a presence in our communities that was elevated rather than the diminished role that we've seen. And he discusses why that is so. But then an interesting thing happens, in that there's this divide that occurs within the Mattachine Society. And Mattachine comes from a word used to basically describe like the Feast of Fools. There were festivals in medieval Europe and before, and where the gay men basically took on the role of questioning the dogmas and authority of society during these festivals. So anyway, they come to a point in the Mattachine Society where I had a friend who used to call them gay normals, and in the Mattachine Society, the gay normals basically took over. They created a schism, and they said, we don't want to do all that questioning of authority stuff. And instead of doing all this research that Harry Hay was doing on our empowered role in society, they called in psychiatrists, and they dressed in suits and very conservative, and they had psychiatrists basically explain their lives to them while they, bowed and nodded. And Harry Hay continued on with his research into this, and it's an interesting thing. He goes on and begins to look at materialistic sciences as well as religious cultures. He has a really expansive view of this, and and he begins to wonder about a gay gene and gay traits. Are there homosexual traits? And that's interesting because you go online today, and any porn site, any gay dating site, you will see a cross-section of society, from the richest to the poorest, every body type, every political view from the most extreme. I just watched online a gay man defending racism and the Confederate flag, and you will see everything from that in between all the way down to whatever, the furthest, most liberal. So is there a homosexual trait? And it used to mean like being swishy and effeminate, but there are men who are swishy and effeminate who are heterosexual. And then the whole idea of drag and, and dressing up as women, and that has been so co-opted by commercialism. It's been turned into a contest, and it used to be very edgy, and and it was pointing a finger and mocking society, but now it's just become another consumer product. So what if there is a homosexual trait? What is it? So I was giving that some thought, because he goes further into this and says that, like, in other species like geese, when two male geese mate, they immediately take a very elevated position within their community of geese, because they have a lot of power. And then he talks about how this was true in tribal societies, when a man didn't get married, and just that alone, and he spent his time giving himself to the community, well, then he became a helper to the heterosexual families, and he would raise children that were unwanted, and help in farming and anywhere. His energies could be put in many places, and the same is true for lesbians. And then if they did form a bond, with another male, if a guy formed a relationship with another man, that gave them even more power, because then they had, they developed a place in society where they could give even more energy. And this can go off into like monasteries and things like that, convents, and which often became very successful. But what I'm getting to here, though, is the whole question of being heterosexual helpers. Okay, so why it reminds me of when I read archaeological papers, especially if you go back like to the 30s, 40s, 1950s or before, you know, if it was written by Christians, they're going to see other cultures from that perspective as barbaric, and you know, and they're uncivilized and things like that. So for instance, you know, within Christian archaeology, the cultures of Rome and Greece are high cultures, but the culture of the Aztecs is barbaric. And because Rome and Greece were the predecessors and the incubators of Christianity. So you see what I mean? There's a definite bias going on there. And I read lots of papers about either archaeology or, you know, they're just, you know, biology. I read one on the microbiome, you know, what the microbiome is. It's microbes. You know, there are more microbes on our body than there are stars in the universe. So that community of microbes is called the microbiome. And I read a paper by a woman who is very noted in her field discussing how they interact with each other. And it was just pure heterosexism. It was totally biased, and, you know, from that perspective. And that's the thing about science, is that you can do research, but if you don't expand the field of your research, if you don't expand your, you know, the points that you're going to study to include outside of your personal bias, then it's going to be false research. So indeed, are heterosexuals the primary goal of humanity, and we homosexuals are here to help? Yeah, I'm a heterosexual helper. How can I help you? And I find that kind of silly. Of course, we all want to help, and you know, and one of the things that comes to mind is the television show Ellen. And I don't watch TV very much, but I've watched Ellen from time to time. And from time to time, she makes a point of saying that no, she doesn't have children, she doesn't want them, she doesn't particularly enjoy being around them. However, again, you see her helping lots of children on her television show. I mean, she just, you know, she reaches out to all sorts of people in the community. And she's a very powerful, wealthy woman, and she can do that because she doesn't have a family of her own. So she's a really good example of that. However, I'm really curious to see where this goes, but I'm also asking, do we have a role beyond heterosexual helper as gay men? So, and again, I'm putting these videos out not to say that there are answers to it, but I think it's time for a heart circle amongst homosexual men to start discussing some things here, because indeed, one of the roles that homosexuals played in tribal societies was that when things got dangerous or confusing, it was easier for us to step in when we didn't have children of our own to worry about, and we could sort of guide the whole community. And so, of course, I mean, I can repeat this endlessly. It's obvious that the ecology is in a major state of disruption, and that the world is overpopulated. And again, I saw a website called Save the Straights, and is that heterosexual helper or what? And then another thing that comes to mind on the other end of this, probably, you know, a more realistic end of it, I guess, is I've been around gay men who are totally self-absorbed, who have no interest in the community or children or anything except their own experience in life, which often includes a lot of shopping, drinking, traveling, and, you know, and taking in culture like opera and things like that. And that's all they talk about. You go to a dinner party and they're talking about IKEA and their latest cruise and the type of vodka they're drinking. And to me, it's just exceptionally boring. And another interesting thing I've experienced in life is a lot of times lesbians are ahead of us on this. Not all, and not all gay men are like, you know, the dinner party crowd. But a lot of times lesbians are more into discussing community and their role in the community as leaders without children and without the need for children, without the need for the burden of being a wife or a mother or anything like that. Yet gay men seem to veer around that discussion. So that's another thing I'd like to bring up. And then the final part of this video is why do I keep saying gay and lesbian and not bisexual and transgender? And that is because I think that bisexuals and transgender people have a different take on society than we do as homosexuals. And a transgendered person can be a heterosexual or a homosexual, and a bisexual can also be a heterosexual. And I think if that doesn't interest you at all, that you're living life from a different perspective. So let's review, shall we? Are we just heterosexual helpers? And if we're not, should we just go through life buying things and experiencing things? I'll give you one more example. You go online to like Grindr or Manhunt, or you know what I'm talking about, right? So you go onto these sites, and guys just spend not all of them, but not every homosexual guy does this, but a lot of them do, like all their time looking to get fucked constantly. And if you try to talk about anything else, they just refuse to talk about anything else besides they want to see your dick. And, you know, and that's fun, and that's fine, and I've done that, and that's great, but like always, forever, that's all they want to talk about. And I've also been around lesbians who do the opposite. It doesn't matter where you're at, what you're doing. You could be having dinner out, and they're giving a lecture to the waiter about some politically correct aspect of that dinner, you know, and the poor waiter just wants to get over his, you know, his 10-hour shift and go to his next job, you know. And so you know what I'm saying here? It's like, have we lost our role in society, and so we fall into these extremes, or are the extremes the norm? Or are we completely missing something else because we live in such a hyper consumer society where, I mean, we have just narrowed it down to one experience at this point: shopping. You know, exploit the resources, use as much military as possible to get them, and then fucking go shopping, get more kids out there, get them shopping, and that's pretty much the experience of life. Work, shop, fuck. Work, shop, fuck. And so, is there anything more to this life? And it seems to me that when you look at what Harry Hay was pointing to, and he may not have defined it perfectly, but he was pointing to that, yes, there is, and it was our role to, as homosexual men, to not, you know, pronounce edicts to the community, but to point to and say, well, perhaps, you know, perhaps heterosexuals, if you put on a condom, you wouldn't have so many children, and you might find time to do something else, and you might not destroy so much of the environment using up resources. And perhaps if you, you know, spent more time in community, and, you know, I won't fill in the blanks. But that's where I'm at with this book. It's a great book. I hope you read it, and let's see, what can I'll play the flute again. And I pass the talisman to you.